All right. Welcome to the My New Normal podcast. I am here with Heidi Armstrong. She is in a very beautiful location in Austin, Texas. Nice, pretty day out there. So welcome to the podcast, Heidi.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, we're so great. We're so thankful to have you. So some things before we get started. Coming up, we have our adaptive trainer course. We actually have our first one coming up in a couple of weeks, and it's very exciting that it is full. So our next one that is available is in February here in San Diego, but we also have courses coming up next year in the spring in both Colorado Springs and Columbus, Ohio. So if you're interested in joining that course, it's for really anyone who is interested in working with adaptive athletes, whether you already are or you want to learn more about how to work with those athletes. If you are an adaptive athlete and want to learn more about strength and conditioning and the movements that you can be doing, coaches, health professionals, everyone, it's for you. It's free. So please go sign up if you're interested in any of those locations or near you. We want to see you there. So we also have our sponsors to thank. So we have High Elite, who is a lifestyle fitness brand founded on the core belief that a company's impact can and should live beyond the products that they sell. As they build on a foundation of innovation and quality, their energy is equally focused on inspiring the well-being of our community. So they are offering a 40% off discount. New Normal 40 is the discount code. All of this will be in the show notes. So if you're driving, be safe. Don't write that down. RX Smart Gear is our other sponsor. They're offering 15% off with a gift code NHLBRX. Again, in the show notes. And the Ready State, where Dr. T has her adaptive online trainer course, they're offering 15% off of that one with the code MyNewNormal15. So thank you to our sponsors for helping make this podcast possible. And again, we are so excited to have Heidi here. And I was reading a little bit about you before we hopped on, and I want you to tell us your favorite chemistry joke, because I read that you love chemistry jokes.
Yes. Actually, it showed up on the t-shirt of my friend's toddler.
Yeah.
And it says you, and then there's an ether molecule. Get it or you don't.
Nah, that's awesome. And that's why it's funny, because a lot of the chemistry jokes, you have to read them or you have to see them to be able to get it, because a lot of them have to do with like the symbols of the elements.
Yeah.
And I love corny jokes of any sort, like cheesy one-liners. Like I'm all about them. For a while, I had so many off the top of my head, and I loved like being able to pull those out. But I feel like I've forgotten all the good ones that I used to love. But one that I came across that I really liked was, what should you do if no one laughs at your chemistry jokes?
What?
You keep telling them until you get a reaction.
Oh, that's so bad.
They're so bad, and I love ones that are like that. It's so great.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah, that was a fun tidbit that I loved reading about you, because I'm all for corny jokes, and especially when they're extra nerdy, even better. So tell us a little bit more about yourself. You know, what do you do, and how'd you get there?
I am the founder of Injured Athletes Toolbox, and I'm a injury recovery coach. And I help athletes overcome the mental and emotional fallout of injury. So we have lots and lots of people, amazing clinicians who help athletes overcome the physical fallout of injury, but the mental and emotional fallout of injury is something that, by and large, people don't want to look at because it's painful, and it affects physical recovery, because we're not different beings. We are all one body, mind, spirit. And so that's what I do. You want to know a little bit about my story?
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about what brought you there.
Okay. So in the early 2000s, I was a very high-level mountain bike racer, and I had a crash on my bike and an injury that took me out of the sport, and I subsequently lost my identity and went from being really easygoing and a pretty calm person to being really angry and insufferable. And my best friend, to make a long story a little bit shorter, had an intervention with me when one day it was after one of my surgeries, and I was supposed to be home with my leg elevated because my knee was about the size of a cantaloupe. And she came in from work and she saw me sitting on the floor compulsively cleaning my cassette tape collection, which don't even ask me why I still had it in the year 2000. I'm not a hoarder, I promise. And she just looked at me and she said, "What in the world are you doing?" And I said, I'm cleaning my cassette tapes. And she said, "Why?" And I said, "Because nobody else is going to do it if I don't." And she said, "I'm going to go in my room and come out in 10 minutes and we're going to have a talk." And she just sat down in front of me and she looked at me and she said, "You cannot be this way anymore. You've got to get some help." And I could have been defensive. I could have ignored her, but I thought that took a lot of guts to say that. And she must really love me a lot. And she's got a lot of guts because she had no idea how I was going to react. I could have lashed out at her. And instead of doing any of those things, I just looked at her and I said, "Okay." And then my next step was trying to find help, and I had nobody with whom to speak. And I just thought, okay, I guess the first thing is to find a psychotherapist. So I did that and ultimately put together an entirely new care team, from my physical therapist to my surgeon, everybody, Eastern and Western practices. And this is my dog Bella here. So I began, at the urging of my physical therapist, to exercise the creative part of my brain, because he told me you cannot continue to go down this road of only using one part of your brain, because it's not going to get you anywhere good. So I started, you mentioned nerdy stuff, and I'm definitely nerdy. So, and he pitched a nerdy hobby to me, which was photography, only learning about it from the angle of physics and light, and not using any of the automatic settings on my camera. And what I realized when I was learning about photography and shooting photos is that I didn't have pain anymore and I wasn't suffering anymore. And so the more I did it, the more I wanted to do it. And this ultimately led to the rest of the people on my care team realizing that I had made a really impressive mental turnaround. And the first, I guess, domino that fell in this whole series that took more than a decade to play out was my surgeon called me and said, "Hey, I have this patient who's an injured athlete, and I don't think he needs psychotherapy at this point, but he needs to speak with someone else who's been in the hole and knows the way out. Can I give him your number?" And I said, "Sure." And I have a personal belief that when we learn, we should teach. And so I began working with him informally and suggested some things that he could do to make himself feel better. And then that led to someone else, that led to someone else, all the while I had a career and it was working in corporate America. But this was something I enjoyed doing outside of work. And then in 2010, I had an injury cross-country skiing. And that was, I should back up and say, I made it all the way back to racing my bike at the same level I was prior to that first injury. It took about 4.5 years, but I got there.
That's awesome.
So fast forward to 2009, I had another injury, fractured my knee, ended up with a chronic scarring condition that is extremely rare. And so I live in Austin, as you mentioned, and I ended up having to travel to Vail, Colorado more than 20 times. I had a total of 8 surgeries, and my whole life got completely turned upside down because I couldn't walk. I spent about 4.5 years on crutches, and I had to quit my job. I basically had to give my life the pink slip. So I couldn't go out and do anything. There was more than a year I spent on my back. And during this time, I had to think about, what do I want to do with the rest of my life? And I was in Colorado at the Stedman Clinic in physical therapy. I was on a bike, and there was an active Dallas Cowboys player on my left who had had hip surgery. And there was a gentleman on my right who was in his 60s who had had knee surgery. And we were all talking, sharing our experiences. And as a scientist, a former scientist, I pick up on patterns really easily. And so I'm listening to the words that we're all using, and I'm thinking, whoa, our experiences are all the same. We're going through the same stuff, the same highs, the same lows, and we could not be more different. And I said, there's something in these experiences that knit us all together. And then also at the same time, I was working with several injured athletes. And so it was kind of like the universe was just turning up the volume a little bit at a time. And I thought, okay, I'll listen. Let me see what's in this. And so in 2012, actually it was a period of 13 months. I had 5 surgeries. I was on my back in a machine that slowly moved my leg, bent and straightened it. And there's only, I'm not a real big TV watcher. There's only so many podcasts you can listen to and books you can read. And I thought, I really want to explore working with people who are injured. And so I embarked on some extensive research, and I wanted to talk with as many injured athletes as I could. And so I wanted to figure out what words they were using to describe their suffering, and then the ones that came through their injury with more resilience and then actual gratitude that experience had happened. I wanted to know what practices they had in common. And so I researched with people who were ages 14 to about 74, 75, equal male and female, all different sports you could think of, different levels within the sports. And I definitely found common threads. So the words that people were using to describe their suffering were universal. The words that in experiences and practices that people had who garnered resilience from their injury, they were also common. And so I used that research plus my experience being injured and crawling out of the mental and emotional hole, and then created Injured Athletes Toolbox.
That's so awesome. What were some of the things that you would see, like whether like language or, just what were those commonalities that you would see between the injured athletes that you were able to piece together that, brought everyone together despite different backgrounds, different injuries, that were in common?
The words that people use, and this really was universal, and it was shocking to me. I should also mention that I included people who were avid walkers and people who were avid gardeners. And so people that ordinarily wouldn't identify themselves as athletes, and maybe other people wouldn't identify themselves as athletes. So I just wanted active people.
Yeah.
And they also suffered in the same way. So the words that people used were frustration, impatience, anger, and sadness. And generally speaking, men tended to use the word angry and women tended to use the word sad. And then disconnection. And by that, I mean both disconnection from their own body. So this vessel that they used to experience and process the world had let them down. So they felt really disconnected from themselves. And then they also felt disconnected from their social network. So their friends that they walked with or their soccer teammates, because when they got injured, they tended to be ostracized.
And so for those that were more resilient and found their way out, and for you as well, what were the universal things there that you saw in common?
The number one thing was practicing creativity. And we can get into this more deeply later. It's all based on the brain and how the brain is wired. What they would report back to me is when they were doing something creative, and by that I mean learning something new. So it didn't necessarily have to be a canvas with a paintbrush and paints. It could be that they were learning woodwork or welding or cooking or something, but just a new quest. So practicing creativity. And when they did that, they experienced some separation and distance from the mental and emotional baggage of being injured. The other thing was that they were not afraid to ask for help. So as a society and a culture, we have a fear of asking for help, and athletes, I think, turn that up to 11 because we don't want to be vulnerable. We don't want to ask for help. And then we're just stubborn.
Yeah.
We're just plain stubborn. We just will find or make a way to do anything. But they were not afraid to ask for help. They had somebody that I call a label reader. And so when we're injured, every single one of us, it doesn't matter who it is, we get stuck in a bottle. And when we're stuck in a bottle, we can't read the label. And so all of these people had someone in their life, like my best friend, Christine, who could say to them, you need help, or I'm worried about you. You need to do things differently. They could be very candid, and then they would listen to that person instead of getting defensive or deflecting. They would take action and listen to that person. And they also did not use the word should and could. So, for example, I should be able to run a mile by now. Or last year at this time, I could run a half marathon. And what that did was keep them in the present. So what do I need to do and pay attention to today so that I'm a little bit better tomorrow? And then what do I need to do tomorrow so that I'm a little bit better the next day? So they just focused on the here and now instead of looking into the past or the future.
Yeah, which is so huge. I see that so much in the athletes that I work with in my PT practice, and that, you know, some of the people that struggle the most spend a lot of time worrying about the future and what this injury means for that. And yeah, same thing of I used to be able to do this. I need to be able to get back there, and parsing through some of that and helping them realize, okay, let's focus on little wins, you know, small goals, small wins, and we'll get there. So not thinking to the future of, okay, I can't, you know, raise my arm the way that I should be now, and I'm not going to be able to play baseball with my kids, so I'm not going to be able to be the father I want to be. And so instead of going to that extreme place, trying to focus on, okay, this is tough now, but let's find what you can do, and we'll work up to that, and not looking 30 steps ahead of what it could mean. And I think that's definitely a challenge for anybody, but especially someone who is used to being able to function at a very high level, and they're not able to be at that level. It's hard for anyone to not look back and to not look into the future and be a little worried. I think some of it is human nature, and it's training. You know, it takes some mindfulness and constant practice of being able to, no matter what, I think everybody will at some point kind of think back or think to the future and maybe get a little worried, but it's a matter of catching yourself and bringing yourself back to the present. That's, you know, the whole premise of meditation is your mind is going to wander, your mind is going to go to those places, but having the practice to be able, in the discipline, to be able to bring it back to the present. It takes, and that's the thing, is it takes practice. And I think that can be frustrating for people too, is they think like, I should be able to do this. Like, okay, being in the present, that's what I need to do. That's my new task. Again, as athletes, like always trying to achieve that. And so then it can be frustrating when, you know, right away it's not easy to do.
It takes a tremendous amount of practice, and I liken it to you would never take somebody who's a recreational cyclist would never sign up for a 100-mile bike race. What happens when we get injured is we are more or less forced to show up to the 100-mile bike race with absolutely no training or preparation. And so I tell people hope is a verb. It's not a noun, and it's a course of action, and it's a practice, just as you're saying. And the great thing about athletes is they have all the focus and intensity inside themselves. It's just a matter of focusing that from the physical to the mental. Absolutely. And then understanding that that will ultimately feed the physical healing. And so to practice the mental training in the same way that they practice the physical training ultimately means healing.
Yeah. So what, you know, in all of the challenges you've faced personally, and maybe even, you know, building the practice that you have now professionally, what have been your biggest successes and things that you're most proud of along the way, both, again, in your personal injury recovery and with your new work?
Personally, I am grateful every single morning that I can wake up and put my feet on the ground and walk. And it took me years and years and years to be able to walk again. And I think about that every day, multiple times a day. And the fact that I remember back to when I was in physical therapy in Vail after my first surgery there, which was actually my third surgery. And my PT said, "What are your goals?" And I said, "I want to race the Leadville Trail 100 mountain bike race again." And with a perfectly straight face, she just wrote that down. And it took me about 3 or 4 months before I realized I need some smaller goals, just like you were saying before. And so I thought, okay, how about to be able to stand up off the toilet without pushing on the counter? That became a goal. Yeah. And then going to the grocery store became a goal, because that was like a Mount Everest for me. And to be able to walk around the block. And so the fact that I can do those things plus other activities of daily living now without pain is a miracle, and it's not lost on me. I'm not sure I would necessarily call this a victory. It's more of an intense, deep gratitude I have for all of the people, that so many people that helped me get to where I am today to become functional again, and to support me and to love me and to hug me when I was crying and to encourage me and to feed us. And I mean, just to pray for us. It goes on and on and on, just years and years and years of support that my husband, Dan, and I have had. And that comes from practice and intention of connecting with other people. So it's, the whole thing about help, like I used to really enjoy, and I still do enjoy, helping people before I got injured, and I was having a really hard time accepting help. And one of my mother's sister friends came over, and she sat down, and just like my best friend, she just looked at me and she said, "Do you enjoy helping people?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Well, then you need to let people help you, because if you don't let them help you, you're stealing their joy. So stop it." So the fact that I have that social connection to so many people is just a wonderful, wonderful thing. Professionally, when one of my clients comes back to me and says, "You know what, Heidi, I was just able to help somebody else through something that I went through, and it made them feel better about the situation," to me, that's a victory.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I want to go back and highlight what you were talking about, having the social support. So what would you say to somebody who, whether it's, if you're talking to a new client of yours or somebody who's listening to this podcast that is either new to an injury and they are having some of those hard thoughts, or, somebody who's been dealing with it for many years and maybe they don't have social support or people who are proactively reaching out to them. Mm-hmm. And so they're scared to reach out, or they don't know how to reach out if they don't feel like people in their direct social circle can help them. What other resources, obviously yourself you are a great resource for athletes facing that, but what could they say to those people in their life that if they're kind of scared to reach out, what's a good way to maybe start that conversation and try to ask for help when it's a scary thing?
That's a great question. And it's scary to a lot of people. I think every single one of us has at least one friend. So I'm going to base my answer on that. And when we're injured, just going about our day, there are always things that become a real pain. Running errands could be one of them, or walking the dog could be one of them. And I encourage people to keep a list of all the things that are a challenge. Maybe cleaning a room in the house or something, but just everything that is becoming a burden and everything that's piling up, make a list of it. The great majority of us have friends, at least in the beginning, that check in on us. And they'll say, hey, if you need anything, let me know, or what can I do for you? And if somebody has that list, they can look at it and say, you know what, I need help with this. So it's something right there, top of mind, that they can say they need help with. So the flip side of this, which is I think more what you're asking, is more often than not, this social isolation that you're talking about is a consequence of the person who's injured just trying to shut the world out. Mm-hmm. And it's very important to appreciate and recognize that as human beings, we are hardwired to need and want a tribe. So it's actually extremely unnatural for our brains and our evolution to just completely isolate ourselves. And so if someone has isolated themselves to the point that friends are no longer asking what they need, then it's okay to pick up the phone and call someone and say, you know what, I'm sorry, I've been in a really bad place and I actually could use some help with things. Can you come over and, you know, run an errands, go to the grocery store, whatever, or can you just come over here and sit and talk? And when an injured athlete isolates and removes themselves from the larger fabric of life, they remove themselves from connection, and connection is something that helps heal them. So we have a lot of research on isolation and what isolation does to our brains and our physiology, and it's almost as dangerous as smoking. So would an athlete smoke? Probably not. And so I think equating the decisions to isolate to something that could physiologically affect them, because it does, it sort of raises the red flag. Another thing I would say is social isolation is often a sign of depression or anxiety. And it's important when we're injured to look at the roots of that and why is that coming up right now. I tell everyone that this injury happened for you. It did not happen to you. And so it's important to change your mindset and change the words that you're using. Let's figure out why this injury is happening for you. And so the majority of my clients also see a psychotherapist. And often athletes move and are sometimes compulsive movers, compulsive exercisers, because they're trying to stuff down emotions. Mm-hmm. And so exploring what those emotions are helps heal and build a better person for after the injury. So like these are the types of things that came up in my conversations and my research with people who garnered resilience from their injury. So it's not a lot of things that we have to do when we're injured to take care of ourselves mentally and physically are not comfortable. Mm-hmm. And athletes are used to not being comfortable. It's just a different kind of discomfort, but they are well equipped to deal with it. And so I say, find or make a way. Just do it. Like it's boot camp. Show up and ask for help.
Yeah, I think that is huge. And it's funny how athletes are so not quick to, but like you said, used to and okay with like pushing themselves physically and getting out of their comfort zone and getting uncomfortable. But man, when it comes to the mental stuff, and I mean, I'm talking for myself too, like having hard conversations and when it comes to dealing with some of the mental and emotional things, it's so much scarier and so much harder. And it's so deep seated for everybody. And so I think having the strength and the courage to at least realize that no matter what, everyone's dealing with some aspect of that. as much as we all like to think we're special snowflakes in our own way, the human
Yeah.
experience is not a unique one. And so there is always going to be somebody who understands where you're coming from. And so whether it's, people who know you and are close to you that you can reach out to for that support, or looking to, whether it's a rehab team or a healthcare practitioner or yourself as a coach, whoever it is, knowing like it's a scary step, but when it comes to recovery, addressing some of the mental aspects is huge. And it's going to be that much of a longer and harder road if you're only focusing on the physical aspect. It's not to say people can't recover if they don't address the mental part, but it is going to be a much longer and harder road. And yeah, I think in my practice, I've definitely come to realize that it is so much a bigger piece of the recovery than any physical exercise that I could give somebody for their recovery, is making sure that we're being mindful of language and, talking about mindset around pain and around recovery. It's huge. And I think it's a piece, unfortunately, that's missing in a lot of healthcare practice still. It's always, let's address the symptoms, let's do, what the textbook says we need to do, rather than coming at things with this holistic approach and incorporating creativity in recovery. What do you mean? It's my knee is hurting. Why do I need to be creative? And so can you speak to that a little bit? You mentioned earlier about, the brain's role and all of that. So.
Yeah. And I know you know this. I don't want to be too technical in my answer. So it won't be as scientific as maybe your
No, I mean, I love it. I love hearing the way that you put it, to your clients and explain things, because that helps me. I'm constantly learning. That's why I love doing these podcasts, because I get to learn from the guests and, be able to take tools to help my athletes that I'm working with as well. So I would love to hear the way that you explain.
Okay, perfect. So I explained that the nervous system is effectively divided into two parts. And so we have the sympathetic nervous system, which is like the gas pedal of your nervous system. And so this is the part that is fight or flight. And if you've got a hungry tiger chasing you, it's going to tell you to run as fast as you can so you don't die. And then we have the parasympathetic side of our nervous system, which is like the brake pedal of our nervous system and controls a lot of our involuntary function, like our digestion, our heartbeat, etc. And it's also the calming part of our nervous system. And so what happens when athletes get injured is the sympathetic nervous system takes over. So it's pain, it's stress, it's anxiety, it's all of these things that are the gas pedal of our nervous system that just keep going and going. And the more that side of the nervous system cycles, the more it wants to cycle. And so what I say is that because I'm a mountain biker, and this would go for hikers too, or anybody who spends time on a trail, the more you walk on a trail, the more worn it is. And then especially on mountain bike trails, you get ruts where thousands of tires have gone through. And so the nervous system ends up in this rut of sympathetic overdrive. So people will feel racing thoughts and they'll feel their heart rate going, and they might feel nauseous. They might either eat too much or they might not eat enough. And that when that part of the nervous system is going, we release stress hormones that affect our recovery, physical recovery, negatively. And there are scientifically studied things that people can do to engage their parasympathetic nervous system. So again, the brake pedal to help calm things down. And what happens when the parasympathetic nervous system is engaged is we begin to get some distance and some space from the mental and emotional fallout of injury. So the injury becomes less of a burden and just more of a thing going on in our life. So some examples would be, you astutely mentioned earlier, meditation. We have lots of scientific data that say that meditation helps engage the parasympathetic nervous system. All different kinds of creativity practices, like knitting, which I actually started knitting because of my injury. So knitting is one that's been talked about lately and actually been studied. So working with knitting, crochet helps calm the nervous system. Any type of creative endeavor. So it could be, and learning something new helps calm the nervous system. But knitting specifically has been studied. Yoga has been studied. And then one of my favorites, and again, I started doing this because of my injury, is swimming or getting in cold water. And when people ask me, what can I do to feel better right now? I say, go turn the shower on cold and just get in until you shiver, and then get out and wrap yourself in a towel. And while you're shivering, your sympathetic nervous system is going. But once that stops, your parasympathetic nervous system takes over, and there's this euphoria that you can feel overcome your body. And so doing things like I've mentioned, and there's an extensive list of stuff. I've mentioned just a few things, especially things that have been studied. But doing things like this over the course of time helps to actually rewire and change your brain. And so in the same way that an athlete wouldn't show up, like I mentioned, they wouldn't be a 5K runner and show up to do a marathon because they get clobbered and injured. It takes time to build up to that. And so working on mental training, it takes time. And so at first it's a burden, it's, a pain, people don't want to do it, but then they realize over time they feel better and better and better, because that rut that I was talking about, where the sympathetic nervous system is going and going, it's like the brain patterns itself in a different way and gets out of that rut and begins to process the world and the injury in a different, more adaptive way.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for sharing that, because that is huge. And I think it's, again, especially in traditional Western medicine, is a part of people's recovery that is missing when they're just going through the traditional channels. I know in my practice and the people that are surrounding me at Movement RX and everything that we have going on here, especially in San Diego, it is a very common thing. So, I hear that, and it reinforces the things that I know and I hear, but I think for a lot of people, that's something very new to hear, that is a very important part of recovery, is accessing that part of the nervous system, and even realizing that a lot of what they are dealing with when it comes to their pain is the nervous system in overdrive. Even if whatever the injury was has healed itself, but they're still having pain from it, it's hard, because we know, like, oh, I saw on an image, I have a rotator cuff tear, my shoulder still hurts, so that's the problem, that's why I'm having pain. But more often than not, it's like you said, the body has rewired itself and just gotten really good at hurting.
Yes, exactly.
And to understand that and knowing how to break that cycle and the components that go into that, I think are huge in recovery. And a lot of times is a big missing piece of why we have such a large number of people in our country in chronic pain, because that piece of medicine, or just recovery in Western medicine, it's missing, and it's such a huge part of it. So I love that it's becoming more well known through our practice and through the work that you do with athletes. I hope that it becomes a more mainstream, if you will, in recovery, in doctors' recommendations in the office. When you see your surgeon, it's not just, oh, go see your physical therapist, whether they refer people to psychotherapy or not so much that as whether it's in PT or it's just somewhere within the chain in healthcare, like that's a known thing to send somebody to, like, hey, okay, you want to be starting yoga, you want to be starting some meditation, whatever it is, it's common knowledge and common practice in somebody's injury recovery. You know, I would love to see things move that way, and incorporating things that are more traditionally thought of as, you know, Eastern medicine or Eastern practice.
Amen to all of that. And thank you guys so much for being cognizant of how important this is and incorporating it into your practice, because as you mentioned, it's so rare for clinicians and providers to do this type of work with their patients.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the way the healthcare system is set up, it's hard to have the time to do that. You know,
Yep.
physicians are rushed in and out of, you know, 10 to 15 minute appointments, and typically PT is either having to see multiple people at a time, or the appointment times are, you know, very short. So hopefully, you know, it's going to be a long process, but as healthcare continues to change, I'm thinking, you know, eventually we should see more of that being common practice. But, you know, at the very least, for practitioners to be mindful of it and being able to incorporate it as much as they can, even if they don't have time to spend on it in sessions, having resources like the Injured Athletes Toolbox and other, you know, whether books, just knowing where to refer people of, hey, this is an important part of your recovery. You know, it's too much to be able to address here, but you know, I really recommend that you go and do this. You know, I hope that that gets to be the norm, and sooner rather than later, because it's huge. But thank you so much for hopping on and talking with us. Like, I definitely feel like I've learned a lot. I hope everybody listening has as well. And if you are somebody who is dealing with an injury, whether temporary or maybe a new permanent injury, or you have a permanent injury, and you feel like you're maybe in a mental rut, definitely check out the Injured Athletes Toolbox. What is your website, Heidi?
My website is injuredathletestoolbox.com, and my email is Heidi, it's HEIDI, at injuredathletestoolbox.com. And I have tons and tons of resources on my website, lots of blogs about all the challenges that injured athletes face that people don't talk about. So I often I'll get emails at 2 a.m. Oh my gosh, I found your website. Somebody finally understands what I'm going through. Yeah, so lots of stuff for people to help themselves to and to learn.
Awesome. And is there anywhere else that you want to share? So we'll include your links and email in the show notes. Can anyone find you? Do you have, you know, Facebook, Instagram, all the other socials that you want to share?
Yeah, I have a Facebook account.
Awesome.
And that's Injured Athletes Toolbox.
Perfect. So another place that people can find resources there. If you tend to be scrolling through Facebook, you'll be able to find some of it on there. So thanks again so much for joining us. And
you're most welcome.
It's really been a pleasure talking with you. And a reminder for everybody listening that we have our adaptive strength and conditioning class. If you are local to San Diego, that is free for veterans to join. So come check it out. That is Monday, Tuesday, Friday at 10:30 a.m. At CrossFit 1904 here in Kearny Mesa in San Diego. Again, if you're not local, but you want to be working with adaptive athletes, we have those courses coming up. So check out our website for all the fun stuff we have coming up. And thanks again to our sponsors, Highly, RX Smart Gear, and the Ready State for those discount codes. And check out the show notes for those specifics as well. So thanks so much, and we will see you all next time.